personally salute all frontliners who have worked tirelessly and innovators who have yielded a solution to prevent and treat COVID-19 and other crisis situations, or an initiative which has contributed towards mitigating the impacts of coronavirus and providing relief to communities. I have observed abundant creativity and innovation emerging at the national, institutional, organizational, and individual levels for the past year.
Now is the ideal time for initiatives like this to be explored, not only encourage development of innovation, but to manage future emergencies and crises.
Sejak mencapai kemerdekaan, Malaysia telah mengalami transformasi yang pesat demi kemakmuran dan kesejahteraan rakyat. Sektor kesihatan, antara sektor terpenting negara, sentiasa berhadapan dengan pelbagai isu dan cabaran dalam era globalisasi ini. Fokus Kementerian Kesihatan menjadi lebih luas, terutamanya dalam menyediakan kemudahan kesihatan yang saksama, mudah diperolehi dan berkualiti. Untuk itu, perancangan dan pelaksanaan program kesihatan negara perlulah berasaskan kepada bukti saintifik menerusi hasil-hasil penyelidikan yang berkualiti. Penubuhan Institut Kesihatan Negara atau NIH yang bernaung di bawah Program Penyelidikan dan Sokongan Teknikal Kementerian Kesihatan Malaysia adalah bertujuan untuk menjalankan penyelidikan yang mana hasilnya dapat memberi bukti saintifik terhadap pembentukan polisi dan intervensi bidang kesihatan. NIH telah diluluskan di bawah rancangan Malaysia ke-7 dan secara rasmi beroperasi sejak bulan Ogos 2003. Visi NIH adalah untuk menjadi organisasi penyelidikan kesihatan terkemuka ke arah meningkatkan kesihatan dan kesejahteraan negara. Manakala misi NIH adalah menjalankan penyelidikan, latihan dan perundingan berkaitan kesihatan yang berkesan dan berimpak tinggi untuk meningkatkan kualiti hidup. Selain itu, NIH juga bertanggungjawab untuk mentadbir dan menguruskan penyelidikan di negara ini untuk menangani isu-isu kesihatan nasional. Kompleks NIH seluas 40 ekar di Setia Alam Selangor mempunyai ciri-ciri seni bina moden yang melambangkan kerancakan transformasi perkhidmatan kesihatan yang dizahirkan oleh penyelidikan yang berkualiti tinggi. Dilengkapi dengan pelbagai fasiliti serba moden, NIH turut menekankan kepentingan ekosistem alam sekitar yang mampu mewujudkan suasana kondusif untuk penyelidikan. Kompleks NIH menempatkan sebanyak 6 buah institut yang mempunyai pengkhususan dalam bidang penyelidikan masing-masing. Kelancaran operasi setiap institut ini disokong oleh pejabat pengurus dan pejabat pendaftar yang menjadi tunjang utama dalam pengurusan strategik dan pentadbiran NIH. Institut Penyelidikan Perubatan atau IMR merupakan institut penyelidikan biomedical tertua di Malaysia yang diwujudkan sejak tahun 1900 oleh Kerajaan British. Ketika itu, ia dikenali sebagai Institut Pathology di Kuala Lumpur. Hasil penyelidikan IMR telah banyak menyumbang kepada pengetahuan, pemahaman, rawatan dan kawalan beberapa penyakit tropika utama di negara ini dan rantau Asia Tenggara. Kini, fokus IMR juga kepada penyelidikan bioperubatan seiring dengan trend perubahan isu dan beban kesihatan negara serta kemajuan teknologi perubatan. Sejarah Institut Kesihatan Umum IKU bermula di Singapura sebagai Royal Sanitary Institute dan dijenamakan sebagai Royal Society for Promotion of Health RSH yang berperanan melatih inspektor kesihatan dari Tanah Melayu, Singapura dan Borneo. IKU berkembang menjadi pusat penyelidikan epidemiologi dan kesihatan awam yang menyediakan data-data kesihatan penting pembuat dasar dan pihak berkepentingan mengenai prevalen penyakit dan taraf kesihatan rakyat negara ini. Antaranya adalah tinjauan kebangsaan kesihatan dan morbidity at National Health Morbidity Survey yang dijalankan secara berkala. Institut Penyelidikan Klinikal atau ICR berfungsi sebagai cabang penyelidikan klinikal KKM dan mula beroperasi sejak Ogos 2000. Dengan 5 buah pusat kajian yang berperanan menggerakkan kajian-kajian klinikal tersendiri serta mempunyai 36 cawangan di hospital-hospital utama KKM di seluruh negara. ICR memainkan peranan penting dalam menerajui pembangunan dan pengukuhan kapasiti penyelidikan klinikal negara, mewujudkan dan mengekalkan pengkalan data klinikal bagi KKM dan juga mewujudkan kerjasama dengan organisasi penyelidikan tempatan, serantau dan antarabangsa mengenai penyelidikan klinikal. Institut Penyelidikan Sistem Kesihatan atau IHSR ditubuhkan pada November 2002 bagi membantu KKM dalam pelaksanaan penyelidikan terhadap sistem dan pengurusan kesihatan negara yang membantu dalam menyediakan bukti saintifik kepada pengubal dasar dan polisi kesihatan negara mengenai taraf dan kualiti penyampaian perkhidmatan kesihatan kepada rakyat. Institut ini berperanan dalam melaksanakan penyelidikan berimpak tinggi dalam bidang penyampaian perkhidmatan kesihatan negara, melaksanakan penilaian terhadap dasar dan polisi kesihatan dan kebolehcapaian perkhidmatan yang saksama dan berkualiti dalam kalangan semua rakyat negara ini. IHSR telah mendapat pengiktirafan antarabangsa dan telah dilantik sebagai Pusat Kerjasama Serantau WHO untuk peningkatan kualiti dan kesihatan. Institut Pengurusan Kesihatan IHM bermula di bawah Institut Kesihatan Awam yang dikenali sebagai bahagian latihan pengurusan. Penubuhan IHM bermula pada rancangan Malaysia ke-6 yang mana ia bertanggungjawab dalam meningkatkan pembangunan modal insan profesional di KKM untuk menghadapi cabaran dalam penyampaian perkhidmatan kesihatan yang berkualiti. Bidang penyelidikan yang dipelopori oleh IHM ialah aspek kepuasan pelanggan, pengurusan sumber manusia serta pemantauan dan penilaian terhadap kualiti perkhidmatan kesihatan negara. Selain itu, IHM turut berperanan sebagai sebuah institut yang menyediakan latihan berkualiti tinggi kepada kaki tangan KKM. Institut Penyelidikan Tingkah Laku Kesihatan IPTK ditubuhkan pada 2005 adalah bukti bahawa bidang tingkah laku kesihatan adalah penting dalam usaha mencapai sebuah negara maju. IPTK bertanggungjawab dalam melaksanakan penyelidikan inovatif dalam bidang tingkah laku, penilaian intervensi promosi kesihatan, kaedah komunikasi kesihatan yang efektif dan komunikasi risiko. Penyelidikan yang dilaksanakan oleh penyelidik-penyelidik di NIH bukan sahaja telah memperbaiki penyampaian kesihatan kepada rakyat Malaysia, namun telah turut mendapat pengiktirafan di dalam negara dan di peringkat antarabangsa. Way Forward NIH akan terus mengkaji dan meningkatkan kepakaran para penyelidik ke arah menghasilkan kajian-kajian berkualiti dan berimpak tinggi dalam meningkatkan taraf kesihatan dan kehidupan rakyat Malaysia.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next lined up program is a knowledge sharing session. Please enjoy.
All of us have a risk of getting cancer, but by changing this risk, by lowering this risk, we have a possibility of reducing quite significantly your chances of picking up the cancer. And the first question I think that you need to ask yourself, and this is a good time to ask yourself that, is what is your risk for cancer? Now, one of the things that we've put together working with colleagues across different institutions like and world-renowned institutions like the World Cancer Research Fund is to put together a kind of assessment tool for cancer in terms of your risk to get that disease. And right off, if you're looking at the screen, feel free to kind of scan that QR code, or even we've put down a bit.ly link down there where you can actually look at running this kind of assessment onto yourselves and seeing really what is your risk for cancer. And I'm going to give you a few seconds to kind of either take a screenshot or either snap this with your phone, or put a screenshot onto your screen if you're watching this from a screen, or just save this to be kind of used later. What does happen onto this tool is that it is it takes about 10 or 12 minutes for you to actually run. It's a series of questions, and it kind of ascertains what is your risk of actually picking up a cancer. And look, admittedly, there are different things that may cause different people to actually have a risk of cancer, and that's what we try to assess from this tool. Now, what will happen when you get the results? What do the results of this tool, when you actually use them, what are they actually going to mean? This very interesting set of results, which are not comparable to anyone except yourselves, will tell you where you are on a risk scale of whether you're approaching high risk, and it's an inverse scale in the sense that if you are at high risk, you'll score much lower, and as you score better and better, you're actually improving your risk. Now, as I said, and this is something that, you know, Malaysians especially get quite tensed about. We always want to score A. So I always have people asking me, what's a good score? What's a bad score? Now, the good thing with this is your own personal score. And while nothing in this world, including risk calculators, are 100%, what we do know is this helps you kind of gauge your own risk in terms of all these different risk factors for cancer. And what you can do is, once you have this first time that you've done this, you'll have a baseline score. That baseline score is actually what you need and what you take to yourself to kind of further reduce the risks in your daily life. Okay, so for example, if you have a score which could be leaning towards high risk, it is time to take a look back, okay, reassess what are those risk factors that are actually causing you to actually have these different high risk, different risk factors which are causing you to have a high risk for cancer, and subsequently look at modifying them, because there are many modifiable risks that can be reduced. And these risks are the risks that you need to actually reduce. And when you reduce this, you actually reduce your overall risk of getting cancer. So the next question that you really want to ask yourselves is, how can you modify your risk? And this is also a significantly important question which everyone wants to know, because how basically this translates into something very similar to how can I prevent cancer? By modifying your risk. And how do I do that? You do that with risks that can be modified. So certain risk factors, okay, are risk factors which cannot be changed. These are non-modifiable risks. These risks include things like age. So no matter how young you look, how much of cosmetic treatment you go for, the sad reality is there is something called age, and that is biological age. And while even that now we're looking at very interesting findings like how good physical activity actually helps to reduce or impact very positively your biological age. Age remains one of the big risk factors for cancer, because as your system kind of slows down and it's not as reactive as before, it seems to be, and this is for adults, yeah, it seems to be that you have a higher incidence of cancer. So how do you translate that? Age is not something that you can change, as despite all the kind of cosmetic changes that you can do. And this is where it's maybe kind of important to make this statement, where if you have a non-modifiable risk, then it's time to look at aggressively modifying the modifiable risks. Okay, and that's where this is. Another kind of risk, of course, is gender. And again, there's been a lot of discussion about genders, but I suffice it for me to say that within cancers, we're talking about chromosomal risk for cancers, and this is largely dependent on what your chromosomes are. And based on your chromosomal kind of factors, gender is then really a non-modifiable risk. Okay, and certain cancers are inherent within only men, for example. And a classic example of this is prostate cancer. It's impossible for a woman to get prostate cancer. But at the same time, there are certain types of cancers which are more inherent in women, but they're not unheard of in men, for example. And breast cancer is really one of that classic examples, where despite about 95% of all people having breast cancer being women, about 5% are actually male. Family history, and this now becomes more and more important as we start to delve into the world of genomics more and more. Now, we're looking at things like genetic factors, blood relationships, and we're finding out, for example, things like breast cancer, which used to be a very, it still is a very strong risk factor of a blood relative having breast cancer. But now we know that breast cancer is linked to a BRCA gene, a gene called BRCA1 or BRCA2, and these genes also help to identify a high risk group, which are males for prostate cancer, for example, and a couple of other cancers as well. But now it's no longer kind of easy to determine that, oh, I have no family history of cancer because I have no close blood relative who has not who is not having cancer or having cancer. So in this now is being negated by the fact that a lot more people are discovering new genetic markers, so which actually are showing us that you're predisposed to a certain kind of cancer. So this is an evolving science, and more and more we're seeing that there is a genetic link between the idea of increasing your risk for cancers. Because let us also be very clear, okay, it's not necessarily true that having a strong genetic link will cause you to have cancer 100%. It's not. It's an increase of risk, and in some cases a significantly increased risk. However, it's never 100% that, oh, I have for example a close blood relative who has breast cancer, it means that I'm going to get breast cancer 100%. What it does mean is that you're high risk, and look, then you start to do other preventive behavior that will help you to overcome, or at least mitigate that high risk due to a close family relative, a blood relation having cancer. So that's how you're working this out. And increasingly, as I say, one of the things that is growing more and more is actually looking at the genetic links between cancer. We're finding stronger and stronger genetic links, which of course means that for most people who are laboring under the misapprehension that, oh, my family has no one who has cancer, so I've got no issues, I'm never going to get cancer, that's also false or fake news, simply because we're finding out things about genetic linkages that we didn't know before. And when you look at those links, you're finding that actually you have links. You are at risk for certain types of cancer or different types of cancer due to your genetic heritage. And again, this is something which is unmodifiable. Okay, you can't, become, say, Caucasian or become white overnight. It's not possible, So, however, there are a lot of risks that can be modifiable. And if we went back to that tool that we looked at earlier for ascertaining cancer risk, you look to see some of the more significant modifiable risks are things that are going to cause you to have quite a significant bit of risk. These modifiable risks include things like cigarette smoking and, of course, the consumption of alcohol. We've had many different debates about this, and though, okay, there is kind of a bit of evidence which is showing you that moderate use of alcohol may be protective in some cancers, some other non-communicable diseases such as heart disease. When you look at bigger data onto like never users, people who've never had alcohol before, the evidence still seems to be favoring never ever using alcohol. So of course, abstinence is the best solution in this case, as in most of others. Obesity is a separate risk which is modifiable for cancer, and unfortunately so is physical activity. And here there's a little kind of caveat or an interesting kind of misconception. A lot of people think that being thin is fine. But what you don't realize is actually that being thin is a separate modifiable risk for cancer compared to obesity. So it could come together. You could be obese and not physically active, but for those who are not obese, not being physically active is a sign of trouble as well. So that's where you need to look at these kind of risks. So a lot of it is things that are very simple. We probably have talked about this multiple times, but it never hurts as we're looking back and moving forward into a new year. And as we move forward into a new year, I suppose it's a good time to kind of look at kind of maybe putting some new goals into place. We always write our new year resolutions. So one of them this year, try to make them that you will do all of these things that you can to lower or modify your risks to as much as you can lower them to. Of course, quitting smoking, reducing alcohol intake, maintaining a healthy BMI, healthy diet, and a healthy lifestyle. These are things that you can do very, very easily. And I'm going to spend the next few minutes speaking to you about how you can modify these risks. Now, Some risks are specific, and screening is one of the things that you can do, which is good preventive behavior and risk, really a form of risk reduction as well. For women, doing a breast self-examination at least monthly is something that is a not a difficult thing to do. It's a no-brainer. Look, all you need to once a month is to actually perform a breast self-examination. Although there's been quite a lot of education and awareness about this, it's still very, very poor in terms of practice, in terms of people who are actually doing this thing on a regular basis. And so really, if there is one New Year resolution in this new year, the new you, okay, should be looking to do this. Do what? At least in terms of self-examination for your breast, try to ensure that you're doing it every month. In terms of your cervical cancer prevention, what you can do is to really get vaccinated for HPV if you haven't already. Now, some people are those who were vaccinated in that cohort of women in Malaysia, and they actually got vaccinated fully. But what we're also finding, because science continues to evolve, yeah, and one of the things that we're getting to know is that when you use those vaccines, we looked at high risk types of HPV strains which could cause cervical cancer, and now we're finding out that in Malaysia there's actually strains of HPV, slightly different strains which may not have the kind of protection from the original HPV vaccine. So for this group of people who maybe had your bivalent or your quadrivalent HPV vaccine, which covers 2 and 4 strains respectively, if I could kind of warrant a suggestion of a gift to buy yourself in the new year, buy yourself a nanovalent vaccine injection for HPV and get that done. Equally, I think it's an equally attractive, very, very life-saving, valuable gift that you could buy a loved one, for example, a wife or a daughter or a niece. That's something which in my eyes is always better than spending money on anything else, because spending money on life. And as with other things, HPV injection is almost affords you lifetime protection. So it's a one-off investment, if you call it such as that. Now, in terms of colorectal cancer, one of the things that we know is that you should look at stopping red meat. Red meat is a big problem maker and is a major driver of colorectal cancer, and you should kind of limit the intake of red meat to about 350 grams to 500 grams a week. That's not much, okay? And most importantly, we've had this. I think many of us who are working in the cancer landscape have spoken to depth about this. That processed meat, okay, your sausages, nuggets, burgers, hot dogs, bacon, ham, these are things which are extremely detrimental to you, and it really drives your risk of colorectal cancer. Colorectal cancer, incidentally, is the #2 cancer in Malaysia among both men and women. So it's something that really we should look at modifying, lowering your risk, modifying your diet. And eating fish more than 3 times a week has been shown to be really, really helpful as well. Now, in terms of liver cancers, it's not so common, but there's certain protective measures that you can do which will definitely kind of lower your risk of picking up liver cancer. Among this is, of course, being vaccinated for hepatitis A and B, always good to kind of ascertain whether your immunity levels are adequate, and if needed, kind of get a booster injection. Ironically now, what is this? This used to be very difficult to say, but now with COVID-19, everybody understands the vaccines and boosters and all that. So that's really something interesting. So in terms of hepatitis A and B, these are things that you can do to protect yourself against the risk of picking up liver cancer. Similarly, for lung cancer is a very difficult disease to detect early. Almost close to about 90% of all our cases are detected in late stages, and there's very little you can do. So what you can do is, and we suspect, okay, the evidence is not quite out on this yet, that a lot of new cancers in people who've never smoked before is actually driven by secondary smoke. And why I'm saying the evidence is a bit out on this one, we know secondary smoke causes cancer. That is very clear. However, we're not very sure how much causes or drives the mutation within your lungs to actually turn out malignant scales. And this kind of exposure, since we really don't know how much is good or how much is bad, and especially if you're a second-hand smoke recipient who's actually not smoking, I think it's easy for us to really stay away from second-hand smoke as far as you can. If possible, don't get exposed at all. Okay. Now, next is, of course, cancer of the nasopharynx. Nasopharyngeal cancer, or NPC, it's also a big cancer in Malaysia. Quite a lot of people get NPCs, and these can actually be done, or kind of the risk reduction. One of the things that we know we can do is avoid or reduce the amount of salt cured meat that we have, especially your ikan masin, which is for many people a staple in the diet every day, so every other day. So if there's something that you can do to kind of reduce the amount of this intake of salt cured foods as well, please do that. And we also know that taking the HPV vaccine, because now HPV now begins to emerge as one of the causative factors of NPCs as well. And so it's a buy one, free one kind of idea. You get a HPV shot, it kind of protects you against cervical cancer, and as well as now nasopharyngeal cancers. In males, even though it's not too common, it's also a driver of certain male rectal area cancers as well. So that's in terms of what is this, reducing your risks. And now what I want to kind of perhaps highlight and what might be interesting for a lot of us is how to spend your money in order to remain healthy. Now, this is something which is really very, how to say, important, or sometimes even apt for us younger people, because especially in the most of our prime of our life, we spend a lot of our time and kind of days in chasing wealth. But often in your 50s, or nowadays even in your late 40s, you actually start to pick up a lot of problems, health problems, and those are related to things or exposure that happened when you were much younger. For example, even for myself, I was a university student who for many years I think subsisted on Maggie Mee and Ramly Burger, and now to my utter chagrin, I'm actually finding out that, oh dear, I should not have had that much of processed meat. So despite going to like almost non-existent amounts of processed meat in my diet, today we're still kind of having to deal with the repercussions of all that much of intake for years and years previously. So for the average Malaysian today, okay, when we talk about staying healthy, you often run up against this problem of being healthy or doing things in a healthy manner is actually expensive. So we often get faced with this, and they're like, Doc, it's too expensive for me to eat healthy, or it's too expensive for me to do XXY. So I'm here perhaps in the next couple of minutes, to kind of put to you this idea or this hypothesis of how to spend your wealth in order for you to remain healthy. Now, that is, I think, quite a important thing to do. Now, how do I kind of look at this? I always look at the cost against the kind of benefit, and ultimately the cost of cancer or treating cancer continues to rise. This is an old slide. I think it looked at things in 2013, and we're 1 year away. In 2022, we'll be 1 year away from 2023. And look, the costs, I think, if anything, have risen beyond the cost that was predicted when this actual financial modeling exercise was carried out. Okay, in 2013, these were the kind of costs that they look at in terms of treating cancer. And in 2023, you can see those numbers have grown, ballooned, sometimes at least increased 3 times more. So the problem is, with most of us, we are about 10 or 15 years away, in many cases, of being at risk for cancer. If you're someone who's young, in your 20s, you're looking at an increased cancer risk in your 40s. Okay, and at that time, 20 years from now, can you imagine, if you put inflation into it, how much is it going to cost to treat this disease? So always at the back of your mind, think of the cost savings if you can avoid cancer. I mean, if I was to put it brutally like that. So don't get cancer and save a lot of money, you know. So that's really what you need to do. And what is more important is, and very significant, is that a lot of the investment or the savings that you get from cancer is exactly the same kind of savings that you're going to get by investing in, say, healthy eating, physical activity, nutrition, because they also are going to help you reduce the risk for heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and kidney disease. And so it's really a case of invest in one and get 4 for free. Buy one, free 4, as we always kind of see ads on this. So as you can see, the numbers in terms of cancer just sky high. And look, one of the first things that a lot of people kind of have in terms of risk reduction is actually not considering whether you have insurance or not. So if you're a young person who's coming out to work, or even if you're in your 30s and you're looking at revisiting insurance, okay, I think rather than invest in, say, changing your iPhone or any other expensive telephone accessory for that matter every maybe 2 years, I think you should look at very seriously the idea of improving, or, you know, if you haven't already had insurance plans, to actually put into place insurance plans. Because at these costs, and now I think, and this is slightly older figures, I think even now the premiums have come slightly down, okay? They've become lower due to competition and such like, and you get a lot more, wider, more comprehensive plans. But on average, you're looking at spending maybe 200 over ringgit a month for an annual premium, for example. Okay, these were numbers which were picked out in 2020, and it gave you that kind of more or less these figures in terms of a very generic insurance plan. Don't worry, I don't work for any insurance company, don't get any money from any insurance company. You can buy whatever type of insurance you like. But 2 points of note: for those who have only health employer coverage or employer-driven health insurance coverage, please be very, very careful, okay, and cognizant of the fact that it's not always that you're going to keep a job for 30 years, 40 years, or very easily move from one job to another. There may be significant gaps in your health insurance coverage if and when, for example, if you move from one job to the other, or even worse, a lot of people now start up businesses, and when they start up businesses, they don't realize that one of the kind of things that they forget to do is actually start up their own health insurance because they've been dependent on employer insurance for so long. Employer insurance coverage is good. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's just often not enough. Okay, first point. Second is employer health insurance coverage will only last for as long as you're employed. And let's say you're employed till the age of about 55 or 60, or now even we're talking about 65 years old. Beyond that, what do you do? Because at that time, your health insurance coverage goes away. And that unfortunately is the time when you start falling sick. So one of the big investments, I come back to this term of spending your wealth, one of the big investments that you need to make in terms of spending your wealth in order to remain healthy is really to have good, solid insurance plans. The earlier you take them, okay, the less you will end up paying in terms of premiums. And some of these plans now have limited time of paying, meaning you pay for 20 years and after you don't need to pay them anymore for life. So it's really an important investment for you to make increasingly, because I go back to this slide and speak to you about the problems pertaining to cost. We find, as I was telling you much earlier in this session, more than 60% actually of all our cancers are diagnosed late. And now we're discovering better and better medication to treat those cancers even when they're discovered late. Okay, in many cases, it's revolutionary. Things like immunotherapies, targeted therapies, they're making cancer into diabetes, where, okay, for the person even diagnosed in late stage cancer, they put on this drug and they can live for years. So it's just a matter and have good productive lives at that. So it's about just putting on these drugs, but unfortunately they're expensive. And when you do not have health insurance that's able to cope with paying for these therapies, they become inaccessible to you. And at that point, it'll be too late for us to kind of sit and cry at why didn't I get these medications? It becomes a difficult thing. Now, as I was saying, if you kind of average it out, it's about 250 ringgit a month for the cost of your life. Now, again, am I telling you to take an annual limit of 2 million, 3 million? This is just an kind of estimation. At these high annual limits, these are the costs of your annual premiums. So should you take something lower? Why not? By all means, do something which is within your means, but however, keeping in mind, make sure that you take a policy that is able to kind of, in 2023, picking up breast cancer is going to cost you about 1 million ringgit, it looks like, from the modeling. So then suddenly, these annual limits of 1 point something million don't look so distant after all. So that's you need to keep that into perspective. The treatment continues to grow more and more expensive, and the fact that having a very small policy with like a low kind of ceiling earlier on in your life, and you're paying very little, but you also kind of have a very low ceiling that might not be beneficial in the long run, about 20 or 30 years, when you actually do end up getting sick, and prices have become super expensive. Now, so next is, of course, healthy eating. And again, this is a very different perspective from what always nutritionists and dietitians kind of talk to you about, because they're talking about calories, I'm talking about the dollars and the cents. So for example, we talk about things like red meat, and red meat is, I think, local bone in metal. Again, I don't think these numbers are accurate. I remember at Deepawali this year, 2021, I think we were looking at the upwards of about 60 ringgit per kilogram of mutton. That's how expensive these things have now become. or even imported lamb, they were looking at about 25, 30 ringgit a kilo, and even beef looking at about 15 odd ringgit. Even that I've been told now is much higher per kilo in terms of costs. And our recommendation is, as you can see, the recommendation from the World Cancer Research Fund is actually to reduce red meat to consume less than 500 grams a week. 500 grams a week is not much. And this is where this whole idea of is superimposed on the kind of consumption of Western food, or, you know, a lot of processed fast food. Because, for example, now with some of your fast food burgers, you get a double patty, you get a triple patty. Some of your, I remember for a while there was this craze about burger bakar, where you could have 6 patties, 7 patties, just in one sitting. You could consume more than 1 week's amount of red meat. And it's the same, of course, with things like, I know now there's all these like tomahawk steaks and so on, which are like kilos and kilos in weight at one sitting. So you can imagine, okay, both in terms of how much money you would save by cutting down significantly on red meat, as well as how much of risk you would reduce by not really engaging onto red meat. On the other hand, for example, and remember I told you that one of the recommendations about fish is to eat fish more than 3 times a week. And eating fish more than 3 times a week actually lowers your risk of picking up cancer, amazingly enough. Now, how much does your fish cost? And again, one of the things or the myths that has been propagated about cancer or any other kind of disease prevention is, oh, you need to get very atas kind of food or atas kind of fish, looking at like, say, salmon at about 40 ringgit per kilo, you know, but you can get things like tilapia. This is, of course, these slides were made before this past 2 weeks sudden increase or the crazy hike in terms of prices. Yeah, so these prices are not really reflective of current times, but it's just to kind of illustrate that, you know, all fish actually, even if you ate ikan bunus, or, you know, ikan kembung, or ikan what is this, the most basic fish that you can find, it is still giving you the same amount of risk reduction, same amount of nutrients. So if you're going to eat salmon, the short of the word is, if you're going to eat salmon, you do not need to do it because you think it's going to keep you healthy and reduce your risk of cancer. Any fish would do as fine. If you want to eat salmon because you want to eat salmon, by all means, that should be a choice. But it's not a necessity for you to eat salmon or any other kind of super expensive fish under the thought that, oh, this is going to actually reduce my risk of getting cancer. Now, again, how about vegetables? Oh, another very sensitive topic in Malaysia today. Even when I went to the market last week, I was getting a heart attack from looking at the price of vegetables, looking only, not even eating. So looking at the price of vegetables might actually increase your risk of getting cardiovascular disease today in Malaysia. Different story. But however, generally, vegetables are much cheaper. And we do know that having adequate amounts of vegetables a day, okay, non-starchy vegetables, is really going to be helpful at reducing your risk of cancer. And similarly, sorry, I'm just going to go back a little bit, because here there's another misapprehension we really need to correct. There's this big idea that, you know, expensive imported vegetables, kale, I don't know now, all these kind of organic, expensive imported vegetables from the jungles of Brazil or such like, now often they are touted or they're advertised as being, oh, you know, very beneficial. They are the only ones that are effective to reduce your risk of cancer and such like. It's all just utter lies. Okay, any vegetable, even the humble tauge, has as much benefit as any other vegetable. So in terms of vegetables, the non-starchy vegetables, you're going to get an equal amount of benefit, whether you can eat kale, which is about horrendously expensive, especially imported organic kale or whatever, as compared to maybe pak choy or Thailand or bayam or whatever. So that is where this is. In terms of nutrients, they're all similar. So if you want to spend your money on kale, fine, but it needs to be something you're doing out of choice, meaning you want to really eat kale, by all means go ahead. But don't do it because you think that kale is going to give you those additional health benefits. Save your money. Spend wisely. Okay. Similarly, in terms of fruits, your watermelon and your pisang gives you as much nutrients and benefits as all your other imported acai berries and so on and so forth. Did the same. Okay. Now, WCRF recommendations are to actually put up about 2 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. Next, and so that's where you can spend wisely in order for you to kind of get helped by spending just a little bit of wealth. And actually, I'm actually making the case that hey, you'll even save money while you're at it. Exercise. Is it expensive to exercise? Again, you really need to kind of thank the YouTube season because now you get so many videos of different people showing you how to do exercises online, and most of this can be done in a home setting without the use of any equipment, equally beneficial. Look, I'm not saying don't need to pay to go to a gym. By all means, this is an investment worth making. But for those who are complaining that mahal lah mau pergi gym ke apa ke, there's so many other alternatives were equally efficacious and most importantly, almost at no cost. So now we come to the next kind of major kind of concern or complaint, or you need the excuse, which even sometimes I give most often than not. It is that of opportunity cost. We always say that we have no time to do this. I have no time to exercise. I have no time to spend on doing these things which can reduce my risk. And this is, again, a very kind of mean salary of doctors, accountants, engineers, and you can work out your salary per hour. Now, what you do know, okay, is that we know that we need to exercise only about 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes a day. So the question will now be, is this 62 ringgit 50 cent, 33 ringgit that you now, we're saying that this is the cost, the opportunity cost that we lose, or by not spending that hour on exercise, or all these other things that I can do to reduce my risk. Okay, this is the expense that I'm going to kind of save, the money that I'm saving. But is this worth it, or is it even going to be enough when compared to the cost of treating a cancer even when it pops up? That is the question you need to ask yourselves. Next thing, of course, and I think this is another thing that we've talked to death, is quit smoking. Okay, enough said. Smoking just gets more and more expensive. And now, of course, it's more atas, a cousin. Vaping is also equally an expensive habit. And yes, vaping has its own risk factors for cancers. We're seeing more and more of it pop up over time. So it's really time to look at that very aggressively. If you're switched from smoking to vaping, please consider quitting. If you haven't started, please don't start, just quit. Alcohol consumption, again, is this an expenditure of wealth which is necessary? Okay, and so we're looking at costs which you can save, and those are costs that you can put into risk reducing behaviors, which will be really, really healthy and significantly impactful in your lives in the long run. Of course, some of us, especially during festivals, we spend a whole lot of money on alcohol, and most importantly, we consume a whole lot of alcohol. A lot of us consume alcohol on a regular basis. And again, this is expenditure, this is money. These are things that we can look at reducing if not significantly stopping altogether. Now, another thing that you can look at is, which I think is things like preventive health behavior, such as screening. We talked about screening earlier, and that's also a good investment, especially for those who are above 30, 35, 40 above.